How's it going, everyone? It's Eli with Common Sense, and I hope you're having a fantastic week so far. So I love my fragrances, but I'm also into watches, and I love wearing expensive watches, and I love also saving some money and wearing some inexpensive ones. This little $50 Casio has been serving its purpose lately. It looks very similar to the presidential Rolex, and it definitely looks very similar, and it's basically a placeholder until I can get something more expensive like that Rolex. I feel like in the fragrance world and the fashion world, there's a lot of stuff that does the same thing. Sometimes the more expensive fragrances are definitely worth it for their quality of ingredients, but sometimes the cheaper ones can outperform and are honestly a much better deal than the more expensive counterparts. I recently picked up Initio's Paragon, and this is probably one of the sexiest fragrance DNAs that I've smelled in a really long time. And there have been a couple fragrances that came out by Lattafa that have basically been doing the same thing as this, but they put a little bit of a twist on it. So today we're going to be looking at two of those, and we're going to be comparing it to the original to see, should you get the original? Should you get one over the other? And based off of your lifestyle and your preferences, I believe that we're going to be able to figure that out today. So sit back and relax, and let's start the video. So this is the OG Initio Paragon, and it is an amazing fragrance. You have such a beautiful fruity plum, a creamy Palo Santo, and just a beautiful, beautiful sandalwood in the base. This one has top notes of bergamot, white sage, and lavender with middle notes of plum, Palo Santo, and black pepper with base notes of sandalwood and agarwood. So the agarwood in this isn't all that pronounced, but what really comes off at first is the lavender and the sweet plum. So you have a beautiful fruity plum and also that bergamot. But I feel like as this sort of settles down, you lose a little bit of that plum sweetness, and it turns to a little bit more of a sage and a lavender fragrance. This almost has an aromatherapy sort of quality to it, because people have said that it's very calming and it's soothing whenever they smell this, especially because of the lavender and the sage. It really opens up the airways and it just makes you feel relaxed. The creamy Palo Santo also does have a little bit of a spicy tone, but it's very woody and it's calming, and it just smells very smooth, and this DNA is just absolutely amazing. So that's basically what the original one is, but we also have two Lattafa fragrances that just came out that are claiming to do the same thing. You have Lattafa's Vintage Radio from the Lattafa Pride line. It's about $50 or $40 depending on where you find it. And then you have the brand new Lattafa Al Nashama, which is not the Caprice version. The Caprice version is the blue one, and that's a twist on Yves Saint Laurent's La Nuit de l'Homme Bleu Electrique. So these two fragrances definitely capture that same magic with the plum and the bergamot with a nice creamy Palo Santo and that beautiful muskiness, especially in the base. So Vintage Radio, in my opinion, is very plum forward, especially in the opening. So it smells very fruity, and you definitely have some of that bergamot in there, but I feel like it's very fruity and it's very sweet, especially in the first maybe 30 minutes to an hour. It has that very nice creamy lactonic and musky kind of vibe, especially in the mid and in the base, but when it dries down, you get a little bit more of that sandalwood, and I think it smells a little bit less lavender heavy, especially from the original and the Al Nashama. So this one's going to be a little bit more of a well-rounded version, so I feel like this one's a little bit more versatile. It definitely has a little bit more of the pepperiness, especially as it dries down. Yeah, there's just something magical, especially about this opening. And I remember I actually purchased this one before I bought the original Paragon, and I was actually quite disappointed because I thought it was going to be just as fruity as this one. I found myself a little bit let down because I just love the opening on this. This one smells way more fruity, and it's definitely a lot more creamy. So I think if you're a guy, you can definitely pick this up, and this is one of my most complimented fragrances that I've worn recently. I've had a lot of my friends who are guys, they comment on this and they say, hey, can you send me the link of where you got that? What is that? Because it smells so good. So in my mind, that's a win. When I've worn this, I've had a lot of women approach me and ask what I have been wearing, because there's just something magical about this, and that's just so capturing and alluring, especially to the women. So if you're guys seeking after women, I think you could definitely pull this off. And if you are a woman who just wants to appeal to other women, I think this is definitely going to be a way to do that. This stuff is just beautiful. So with Lattafa's Al Nashama, this is going to be a slightly more feminine twist to that Paragon DNA. This is going to have the same notes, but I believe they added patchouli, oak moss, and leather in here with a little bit of an incense twist. You still have that beautiful plum, but I feel like the plum is a little bit more citrusy and it's a little bit tart, and there could be almost like a pineapple or a green mango accord in here. So it smells a little bit more tropical. So if you're looking for a slightly more tropical summer version of Initio's Paragon, this is going to be your best friend. And I think if you're a woman, you can definitely pull this off. off and you're going to be getting compliments. In addition to that slightly pineapple and citrusy tartness, there is going to be a little bit more of a green vibe from this. So it's a little bit more herbaceous. I feel like the sage is a little bit turned up in this, and you still have some of that lavender, but I feel like it's a little bit more toned back, and the citruses definitely pop out, at least in the opening. There is also a little bit of a feminine floral quality to this, but it definitely still smells very similar to the original, but with a little bit more of a feminine twist. This stuff is quite amazing, especially in the opening, and I've been wearing it quite a bit the past couple days because the weather has been a little bit more warm. Now let's compare some of the Drydowns a little bit. So Initio's Paragon definitely turns quite a bit more peppery. You have a more of a peppery wood, but you still have a little tiny bit of that plum sweetness. But it smells a little bit more aromatic, and some people have said that there's a little bit of a mentholated vibe, and I can kind of see what they're saying. It's a little bit more lavender and slightly medicinal heavy, but I still think it's very pleasant. Still lactonic, but I definitely wish that the plum and the bergamot lasted a little bit longer and translated a little bit more in the dry down. So while Paragon doesn't have a whole lot of that fruitiness in the dry down, I think Vintage Radio definitely fills in some of those gaps, and it smells a little bit more fruity in the dry down, but it's still very clean. It's very creamy, musky, and lactonic. So you have a little bit more of that sweetness, and this one is definitely unisex. Same with the other one. In fact, all of these are. But I think in the dry down, as a guy, I think you're gonna probably prefer this one a little bit more to the other two. A little bit more masculine, and I feel like there's also a little bit of sandalwood and just a slight bit of incense in this one. So the dry down for Al Nashama is a little bit more incensey, and as it dries down, the florals definitely come out, and it still stays a little bit tropical, but I feel like I do get a little tiny bit more of oud in here, but like I said, it's a little bit more floral than the Paragon, and I think it does amazing, especially for the summer. It also turns a little bit more gourmand, so almost like a caramel in here, like a caramel accord. It's kind of interesting. So imagine a slightly more citrusy version of Paragon with a little bit of caramel and a beautiful lactonic base. So that's what you're gonna get with Al Nashama. Performance-wise, Initio on my skin, it doesn't last as long as some other people have said. For me, I get about maybe 8 hours of longevity out of this one. It's definitely pretty strong within the first 2 hours or so, but it really does become a skin scent, and at least on my skin, it doesn't perform as much as I thought it would. I bought Vintage Radio first, and I was blown away by the performance on this one. I want to say I got about 5 hours of solid projection on this one. Like, this stuff is a beast, and it lasts about 12 to 14 hours in terms of longevity. So this is one of the longest lasting ones by far, and if you want something that's going to be a little bit more loud, I think you're going to want Vintage Radio. And Al Nashama, I get about 9 hours of longevity out of this one, and it's pretty strong for the first 3 to 4 hours, and like I said, it's very tropical, but if you let this sit in the dark and if you let it age and macerate, I have a feeling like it's going to last quite a bit longer. Really curious to see the performance on this as it ages. So price-wise, Initio's Paragon, I believe it retails for like $360, $340 if you buy it at the original Initio retailers. You can still get a secondhand bottle for about $200, and I think I paid a little bit less than that for this one. For Lattafa's Vintage Radio, you can pick this one up from Jomashop for about $35. That's where I got this one. It was on sale, but again, you can also get it for about $40 to $50. So for that price, I think it's definitely worth it. I do not have a problem spending $50 or $60 on this one. Al Nashama's a little bit newer, and I've seen it go for about $25 to $30. So if you can get that for $30, I think this is going to be an amazing steal. But is it worth it to pay the $300 for the Initio Paragon? I don't think so. While I am a huge advocate for niche fragrances, and I do plan on covering more affordable niche fragrances for the future because I want to help you guys step up your fragrance game and step into the world of niche fragrances because it is a whole beast in itself. But paying $200-300 for Paragon on a fragrance that doesn't quite last more than 8 hours on my skin, it's kind of hard to justify that. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing DNA and I absolutely love the original, but I have to say, in terms of performance and price-wise, the Vintage Radio is still my #1 pick. I tend to lean a little bit more towards this one, and I've got a lot of the compliments from women on this particular one. If you want to save a little bit of money and get something similar to Vintage Radio and Paragon, go with the Al Nashama because it is a little bit cheaper and it's going to last, I'm guessing, very similar to the longevity of this one, but you just got to let it sit for a bit. I do love how this one smells, but personally on my skin, I like Vintage Radio. So there we have it, 2 amazing Lattafa fragrances that are similar to Initio's Paragon. hopefully you will be able to make a decision. And I do think that these two fragrances, the Vintage Radio and the Nashama, I think they are different enough that you can pick both of them up. If you don't own the Initio Paragon, I'd go with Vintage Radio, and if you own this one already, I think this could almost be seen as a flanker to it. So I think it's definitely unique enough to have this in your collection because it follows that same sort of creamy vibe, but it does it with a little bit more of a summer twist. Thank you all so much for watching. I plan to do more videos like this where we compare some of the clones to the original fragrances, so basically a head-to-head battle. I hope you all have an amazing week. I've been Eli with Common Sense, and until the next time, bye-bye. Oh my goodness, I sprayed all of these tester strips in here and now my whole room smells like Paragon. That's a good thing. Whew, smells good.